Kellan Whitmore sat across from his mistress, his fingers lightly tracing the rim of his wineglass, completely unaware that his pregnant wife, Sienna Whitmore, was about to turn his perfect night into his worst nightmare. Kellan Duvall had everything a man could want: wealth, power, and a beautiful wife. His name commanded respect in the real estate industry, and his empire stretched across multiple countries. He lived in a sprawling mansion with his wife, Sienna, who was expecting their first child in a few months. Their life, at least to the outside world, was nothing short of perfection. Sienna often appeared by his side at charity events, her radiant smile and growing baby bump a testament to their seemingly strong marriage. The media adored them, painting their relationship as one built on love and devotion, but Kellan was a man of secrets. Behind closed doors, he was not the devoted husband everyone believed him to be. While Sienna spent her days preparing for the baby, decorating the nursery, and attending prenatal classes, Kellan was indulging in a hidden affair with Delara Voss, a woman whose beauty was as intoxicating as the danger she brought into his life. Delara was unlike Sienna in every way: bold, reckless, and unbothered by the moral lines she crossed. She thrived in the luxury Kellan provided, and he enjoyed the thrill of a hidden romance, a secret life that made him feel untouchable. Kellan took careful measures to ensure his double life remained undiscovered. He had a separate phone for Delara, one he kept locked away when he was home. His assistant, who was loyal to him alone, managed his schedules with precision, ensuring there was never an overlap between his time with Sienna and his stolen moments with Delara. He justified his actions with shallow excuses. Marriage had become routine, and Delara brought excitement. He convinced himself that what Sienna didn't know wouldn't hurt her. The nights with Delara were always extravagant. Kellan spared. No expense, whisking her away to high-end hotels, flying her to different cities, and gifting her jewelry that sparkled as brightly as the deception he lived in. He felt invincible, confident that he had perfected the art of deception. That evening was no different. Kellan had planned an elaborate date night at one of the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurants, a place where only the elite dined. The venue was perfect: secluded, private, and breathtakingly romantic. He reserved a table on the terrace, ensuring they had an uninterrupted view of the city skyline. The staff, accustomed to discretion, knew better than to question the identity of the woman on his arm. Delara arrived dressed in a sleek, form-fitting gown, her presence commanding attention. Kellan admired the way she carried herself, exuding confidence and allure. The evening unfolded as he had planned. Expensive wine flowed, delicate dishes were served, and laughter filled the space between them. They were lost in each other, oblivious to the world around them. Kellan believed the night was flawless. He had checked every detail, erased every trace of his plan from his schedule, and left no room for suspicion. He was completely unaware that at that very moment his wife was beginning to suspect the cracks in their perfect life. Sienna, alone at home, felt an unease she couldn't explain. Kellan had told her he would be working late, but something about the way he had rushed out earlier made her question his words. His recent behavior had changed. He was more distracted, more distant. He took longer showers, kept his phone close, and avoided long conversations. A gut feeling, an instinct she couldn't ignore, told her something was wrong. As Kellan enjoyed his evening with Delara, he had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The illusion of control, he believed, he had was nothing more than a fragile facade, and in just a short time, everything he had worked so hard to hide would be exposed in the most devastating way possible. Sienna sat alone in the vast emptiness of their mansion, the silence pressing down on her like an invisible weight. The air felt colder than usual, despite the luxury and warmth of her surroundings. She had tried to push away the uneasy feeling, gnawing at her, telling herself it was just the pregnancy hormones making her emotional. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Something about Kellan had changed, and she could no longer ignore the signs. She had always trusted him, never questioning his late nights at the office or last-minute business trips. But lately, the excuses had become more frequent, his attention more distant. The man who once pampered her with affection now barely noticed when she spoke. He was distracted, lost in thought, his phone never leaving his side. When she asked simple questions about his day, his answers were vague, rehearsed. The warmth in his eyes had been replaced with something she couldn't quite place. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe detachment. Tonight had been no different. Kellan had kissed her goodbye with barely a glance, muttering something about an important client meeting that could not be rescheduled. She had accepted it at first, even telling him to have a good night, but as she sat there in the dim glow of their bedroom, an unsettling thought crept into her mind. If he was in a meeting, why had he changed into an entirely different suit than the one he wore that morning? Why had he left in such a hurry, without so much as a look back? Doubt took hold of her, and before she could stop herself, she picked up her phone. It wasn't like her to invade his privacy, but the fear of the unknown was worse than the guilt of checking. She opened the GPS tracking app they had installed on their phones years ago for safety, a feature she had never felt the need to use. Her heart pounded as the screen loaded, revealing Kellan's location. He wasn't at his office. He was downtown, in the middle of the city, nowhere near any of his usual work locations. Confusion turned to dread as she zoomed in on the exact spot. It was a restaurant, a place she had never heard of before. That was strange in itself. Kellan always took her to the finest places, and she knew every high-end restaurant in the city. So why was he there now, alone, at this hour? A sickening realization hit her. He wasn't alone. He couldn't be. People didn't go to an expensive, romantic restaurant like that for business meetings. Sienna's pulse quickened, her body tense with anxiety. Every fiber of her being told her to stay home, to not go looking for the truth she wasn't ready to face. But she couldn't sit still. She had to know. She had to see it with her own eyes. Without a second thought, she grabbed her coat and rushed out of the house, her mind racing. The drive downtown felt like an eternity, every red light and slow-moving car a test of her patience. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. By the time she arrived, her breath was shallow, her heart hammering. The restaurant was elegant, with a glowing rooftop terrace that overlooked the skyline. She sat in her car for a moment, gripping her stomach as if to protect the child inside her from the storm of emotions brewing within. Then, summoning all the strength she had, she stepped out and walked toward the entrance. The moment she entered, the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses filled her ears. She scanned the room, her eyes darting from table to table, searching. And then she saw him. Kellan sat at a secluded table near the terrace, dressed in his finest suit, a glass of wine in hand. He wasn't alone. Across from him sat a woman, stunning, confident, and familiar. The way she leaned in, the way Kellan smiled at her, the way his hand rested so effortlessly close to hers, it was unmistakable. Sienna felt the ground beneath her shift. Her worst fears had just been confirmed. Sienna stood frozen at the entrance of the restaurant, her body locked in place as she watched the betrayal unfold before her eyes. The dim candlelight flickered against the glossy wine glasses, casting a soft glow over the intimate table where Kellan sat with the woman who was now the embodiment of her worst nightmare. He looked at her with an ease that Sienna hadn't seen in months, his expression relaxed, his laughter genuine. There was no trace of the tension he carried at home, no sign of the husband who barely acknowledged his pregnant wife. She felt a sharp stab of pain in her chest, as if reality had physically wounded her. The moment stretched endlessly, her mind, struggling to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. A part of her wanted to storm over, to scream, to demand answers, but another part, one she didn't recognize, held her back. Instead, she simply watched, unnoticed, as the world she had built with Kellan unraveled in front of her. Her gaze shifted to the woman. Sienna knew beauty when she saw it, and this woman had the kind that demanded attention. Her dark hair cascaded. In loose waves over her shoulders, her makeup was flawless, her dress hugging her figure in a way that left no room for modesty. She was the opposite of Sienna, who had spent the last several months in maternity clothes, her body changing, her days consumed by preparations for their child. A sick realization hit her. This wasn't new. The comfort between them. The way Kellan's fingers brushed against the woman's hand without hesitation, the way she leaned in so effortlessly, it was clear they had been together for a while. Sienna felt a wave of nausea, her stomach twisting. As she struggled to breathe, she clenched her hands into fists, forcing herself to step back. If she stayed any longer, she might break apart completely. Turning quickly, she made her way back through the entrance, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her vision blurring. She needed air. She needed to think. Once outside, the cool night air hit her skin, but it did nothing to calm the fire raging inside her. Her heart pounded as she reached her car, her hands trembling as she fumbled to unlock the door. 1,000 thoughts ran through her mind at once. How long had this been going on? Had Kellan ever felt guilty, or had he always been this cold? Had every late night at the office been a lie? Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't change anything. She had been blind, too trusting, too consumed by the idea of the perfect life they were supposed to have. And now, standing in a dark parking lot, abandoned in the most brutal way possible, she realized just how alone she truly was. But then another thought surfaced, one that sent a chill down her spine. Kellan wasn't just cheating on her. He was doing it while she was carrying his child. Their child. A surge of something stronger than heartbreak coursed through her veins. Anger, betrayal, something darker. She wasn't going to be the woman who ignored the truth. She wasn't going to pretend she hadn't seen what she just saw. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she snapped a quick photo of Kellan and his mistress through the restaurant window. It wasn't just for proof. It was a reminder, a turning point. Sienna had spent years believing Kellan was the man he pretended to be. But now, as she sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, she knew the truth. And she wasn't going to let him get away with it. Sienna drove aimlessly through the city, her mind consumed with a storm of emotions she couldn't control. The weight of betrayal sat heavy in her chest, a suffocating presence that refused to let her breathe. The city lights blurred past her. As she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension. She had spent years trusting Kellan, believing in the perfect life they had built together, only to discover that it had been nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. Her phone vibrated on the passenger seat, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Kellan's name flashing. He was calling her. The irony of it nearly made her laugh. Was he checking in on her, pretending to care about her well-being while sitting across from another woman, whispering sweet nothings into her ear? The thought made her stomach turn. She let the call go to voicemail. Then another text followed. Meeting ran late, headed home soon. Sienna's grip on the wheel tightened. The audacity. He wasn't even trying to come up with a believable excuse. He was still lying, still treating her like a fool. But she wasn't a fool anymore, not after what she had just witnessed. She pulled into a quiet parking lot, her mind racing. This wasn't just about a husband cheating on his wife. This was about deception, betrayal, humiliation. Kellan had promised to love her, to build a future with her, to stand by her side as they raised their child together. And yet, he had thrown it all away for the fleeting thrill of another woman's touch. For the first time since discovering the affair, she allowed herself to cry. Not because she was weak, but because she needed to release the pent-up emotions that threatened to consume her. Silent tears streaked down her face as she sat alone in her car, her body trembling with rage and heartbreak. But after a few minutes, she wiped her face and exhaled sharply. She had a choice to make. She could either confront him tonight, demand answers, and listen to whatever empty excuses he would offer, or she could do something else, something that would remind him that she wasn't a woman to be discarded so easily. A plan began to form in her mind. She had the evidence. The photo she had taken would be enough to expose him for what he truly was. But she needed more. Something undeniable. Sienna took a deep breath and started her car again. She knew exactly what she had to do. Instead of driving home, she turned toward the restaurant, her heart pounding with anticipation. This time, she didn't linger outside, watching from a distance. She parked close, stepped out, and walked directly toward the entrance. The hostess greeted her with a warm smile, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Sienna's eyes scanned the room, landing on Kellan's table. He was still there, still laughing, still unaware that his world was about to crumble. She reached into her bag, pulling out her phone. With calculated precision, she snapped a few more pictures, this time from a closer angle. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wanted Kellan to see her. She wanted the moment he realized he had been caught burned into his memory forever. She stepped forward, making her way to his table. Kellan's back was to her, but his mistress saw her first. The woman's expression shifted from amusement to confusion, then to something closer to fear. Sienna felt nothing but cold determination. She was no longer the naive wife sitting at home, waiting for her husband to return. She was the woman who had just taken back control. And Kellan was about to learn exactly what that meant. Kellan turned at the last second, his relaxed demeanor vanishing the moment his eyes met Sienna's. His face drained of color, his lips parted as if scrambling for words, but none came. The once confident and composed man, who had so effortlessly deceived her, was now frozen in place, caught in the very act of betrayal. The air between them was thick with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone at the table. Sienna took a slow step forward, her heart pounding, but her expression remained unreadable. The restaurant, once filled with the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses, seemed to grow quieter as nearby diners sensed something unfolding. Even Kellan's mistress, the woman he had chosen over his pregnant wife, sat rigid, her hands slowly retreating from his. Sienna pulled out her phone, raised the screen, and turned it toward him. The image of Kellan smiling at another woman, his hand lightly touching hers, was as clear as daylight. She held it there long enough for him to process what it meant. Long enough for him to understand that there was no way out of this. His mouth moved, but she didn't give him the chance to speak. She had no interest in hearing whatever weak excuse he was about to offer. A quiet strength settled within her, replacing the chaos she had felt earlier. The anger, the pain, the humiliation, it was all still there, but now it fueled her. She wasn't here to beg for answers or to ask why he had done this to her. She was here to make sure he knew that his lies had finally caught up to him. Kellan reached for her hand, but she stepped back, watching as panic flickered across his face. She had never seen him afraid before. He had always been the one in control, always the one dictating how things would go. But now, the power had shifted, and he knew it. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough that only he could hear her. Whatever she said sent a shudder through him. His mistress tensed, eyes darting between them, realizing that whatever Kellan had told her about his wife had been a lie. Sienna didn't stay to watch him squirm. She had made her point. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Kellan and his mistress trapped in the mess they had created. She could feel his eyes on her as she exited the restaurant, but she didn't look back. Outside, the night air wrapped around her, and for the first time in hours, she took a deep breath that didn't feel like it was crushing her. The pain of his betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. She had faced him. She had exposed him. And now, she was the one walking away. She slid into her car, her hands steady on the wheel. The road ahead of her was uncertain, and she knew the days to come would not be easy. There would be more lies, more attempts from Kellan to fix what couldn't be repaired. But she had already made up her mind. Her phone buzzed with another text. "Sienna, let's talk." She deleted it without reading further. She had spent years being Kellan's devoted wife, waiting for the love and loyalty he had promised her. But she wasn't waiting anymore. As she drove off into the night, she knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a new one. And this time, she was the one writing it.